Christian McCaffrey was amazing during the 2025 fantasy season, but it killed his dynasty value. We'll tell you why next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. He is the Fantasy Football Hall of Famer, Michael Fabiano. And on today's show, we're taking a look at some unbelievable stats from a recent article by none other than Michael Fabiano. We're going to talk about Chris Olave's breakout season. We're going to talk about the Pittsburgh running backs and their dynasty value. But Fabs, I want to start with Christian McCaffrey, who there were a lot of people who are really nervous about him coming into this season, rightfully so. You're raising your hand. And then he goes on to have an amazing year. But you and I are both terrified of what the future might look like for McCaffrey. Can you explain what's going on here a little bit?
Yeah, you know me with my historical trends. And, we'll talk about Saquon Barkley and why the trends that I told everyone about back in the summer came true. But McCaffrey was amazing this season, like historically amazing. He had 417 fantasy points. It's the third most points of any running back entering a regular season at age 29 or older. Priest Holmes actually holds the two top spots. Would you believe he scored 445 PPR points at age 30? I mean, that is just unbelievable. Holmes is also the only running back in NFL history to finish with more than 359 fantasy points in a single season at age 30 or older. So if you look at that, that's already going to be a drop-off of around 60-ish points for McCaffrey if that trend holds. And only 6 running backs at age 30 or older have ever scored 300-plus fantasy points in a single season. So think about that. McCaffrey over 400 this past season. That is a stat that's very interesting to me. I'm not talking about just from the last 10 or 20 years. I'm talking about in the history of the NFL. We're talking about Super Bowl era. And when you look at McCaffrey's touches, he had 413. It's the second most ever recorded by a running back at age 29 or older. And he's only one of 4 running backs who've seen that many touches in a single season at 29 or older. Walter Payton had it. Curtis Martin and Tiki Barber. Now, Walter Payton's numbers didn't decline the following year, but Curtis Martin saw a 182-point decline the following year, and Barber saw a 61-point decline the following year. And neither of those running backs, and we'll include Payton in this as well, were injury-prone or had injury issues throughout their career. This is now an issue for McCaffrey. And people are going to see the numbers that he put up last season and think, wow, I've got to get this guy. He's a first-round pick. It's the same guy. The workload, and I'll preach the same kind of thing as I did with Barkley. The workload at that age is not a good thing. He's had many magical seasons, so I don't want to say that this was a magical season for his career. But for a running back at his age, it certainly was. And so while I was avoiding McCaffrey in round 1 this past season, and I was wrong, I'm once again avoiding him in round 1 next season because of these trends and because of his age and the workload that he had. And the workload, Marcus, is not over yet.
Exactly what I was going to say. Game. 413 regular season touches. He had 21 touches against the Eagles. And I'm willing to bet he's probably going to have another 20 touches against the Seattle defense. There's a chance that he's over 450 touches. I think the other thing that's concerning is as a runner, he has really declined. Like if you go back to the 2023 season where he was unbelievable, I thought he had a case to be, the MVP that year. He averaged 5.4 yards per carry. That was just all the way down to 3.9. And generally, and you know this, that most of these running backs don't get more explosive or efficient as they get into their 30s. There are a few exceptions, and maybe we'll talk about one of those exceptions here in a little bit. But if he's not giving you much as a runner, it's going to have to be all as a receiver. And I just think the 49ers, if he's on the 49ers next year, they are not going to give him this much work as a running back. They're going to have to basically use him as a receiver. So it's not, I could see a situation where he still is catching 80 balls every single year, but he's only getting 150 carries, 125 carries. And that's just not all that valuable. And right now in Dynasty Leagues, he's being drafted as RB11 this awesome season because of all the workload fabs. I'm going to have to move him down. It's just we have too long of a catalog of these guys really falling off after having that many touches in one season.
And there have been exceptions to the rule. I mean, Derrick Henry's been an exception to the rule. Curtis Martin led the league in rushing at age 31, but then the following year he fell way off. But for the most part, the trend is that these running backs, especially at this age, when they see that many touches, and again, McCaffrey's touches are not over for this season. You have to figure that the Niners, as a team, as an offense, Kyle Shanahan decided at the beginning of the year that we're going to give McCaffrey every touch he can handle this season because this might be his last big season. So kudos to McCaffrey for staying healthy and being as great as he was. But that is a big red flag. That number of touches, which again have not ended just yet for a running back at that age.
Let's talk about Saquon Barkley in his dynasty value, because it was a really rough year for Saquon. And now he's going to have another offensive coordinator change. Now that they have fired Kevin Patullo, we've heard some names, including like Brian Dable. How are we feeling about Barkley going into the 2026 season?
It's funny because I'm doing a 1-man 5-round redraft mock that'll be up at Sports Illustrated probably on Friday. And I have Barkley as a 3rd-round pick in that draft. And in Dynasty, he's not a player that I want.
Would you rather have McCaffrey or Barkley?
I'd rather have I have to see what the situation is, honestly. It's hard to make a decision right now.
Can I tell you what their ADPs are?
Right now, I'd probably want McCaffrey. But again, I don't know what the Eagles' offensive coordinator situation is going to look like or what their roster is going to look like. Is A.J. Brown back? He may not be there anymore. We'll find out. Do they eliminate the tush push? Is Dallas Goedert gone? There's a lot of question marks in Philadelphia in terms of what that offense is going to look like. I probably want McCaffrey right now. It's close, though. But Barkley was the perfect example of why these touches, these excessive touches, matter to a running back, especially at that age. And it's funny, too, because there were, going into this season, 32 other instances of a running back having 400-plus carries in the regular and postseasons prior to 2024 when Barkley did it. The average decline in fantasy points was 133 the following year. Barkley, 123 fantasy points declined. I mean, so he was right on that trend. And then when you also, look at the touches that he had, he's also getting up there in age. He's not getting any younger. Saquon Barkley is a player that I avoided this past season, and I would probably avoid again next season.
Saquon Barkley right now being drafted as RB16, McCaffrey RB11. So McCaffrey's actually going higher. And honestly, I can kind of get it. I think Barkley has a much better chance to be the guy that has a bounce back rushing season. But I think McCaffrey's just going to be one of these guys that can be a receiving running back, play on every single passing down for the next 3 or 4 years and just catch 70, 80 balls. Yeah. And it's really hard to find those type of guys. And Barkley is going to need to score a bunch of touchdowns and be incredibly efficient in the run game because he just doesn't catch a lot of passes. That's not his forte.
My mindset, Marcus, is always on PPR. I never think of in terms of standard leagues because why? They're dinosaurs. So I'm always thinking in terms of that. And that's why McCaffrey would have finished as the wide receiver 7 this year based on his receiving totals. Like, think about that. So is he going to turn into, like Larry Centers? I mean, I don't know about
exactly
that.
The name I was thinking about, honestly. Yeah.
You go back and look it up. He didn't have a lot of carries, but he caught 1 million balls out of the backfield in his career. But again, that both backs are going to come with risk. Barkley came with risk. They both came with risk this past season. Barkley knelt down to that risk and those trends, while McCaffrey broke free of those the chains of that trend, in terms of being durable. But both guys come with risk. I mean, you have to learn from the past. History tends to repeat itself.
And I just think with McCaffrey, he's the best receiving running back that we've ever seen. So again, even if he's not being used much or at all as a runner,
you think he's better than Marshall Faulk and LaDainian Tomlinson?
better than Tomlinson. I think Falk is the only other guy that's on his tier.
Okay.
I mean, so you can design an offense around CMC as a focal point of your passing attack. And knowing Kyle Shanahan and how creative he is, I'm sure they're already thinking about that. And that's probably why they've loaded him up with so many touches this year, because next year it's going to look very different.
Right. And I mean, if he does eventually, come back inevitably to San Francisco or stays in the Shanahan offense, no George Kittle next season, maybe no Juwan Jennings next season.
Definitely no Brandon Ayuk.
No Brandon Ayuk. Ricky Pearsall's made out of paper. They're going to be looking to add pass catchers and potentially continue to utilize McCaffrey as a pass catcher.
All right, I want to talk about the Pittsburgh backfield, because this was a very productive backfield in 2025, and suddenly all of their dynasty value just went up in smoke. We'll discuss it more next. This episode is brought to you by Gusto. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets, but that's where Gusto comes in to take the stress out of your payroll, benefits, and HR so that you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or the hidden fees, and unlimited payroll runs for just one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of the month. And knowing that you can reach certified HR experts anytime gives you real peace of mind. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, that is gusto.com/LockedOnNFL.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't done so already, check out the new Everydayer Club. You're going to get access to ad-free audio of this podcast, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Go to lockedondynasty.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, Fab, so I want to talk about the Steelers backfield. But first, we've got to start with Mike Tomlin stepped down on Tuesday, just hours after their Monday Night Football loss to the Texans in round 1 of the playoffs. And that means there's going to be a lot of change. This is not going to be an Aaron Rodgers-led offense. I mean, I would assume. I don't see any way that he comes back. I don't see any way that Arthur Smith comes back. He's been interviewing for head coaching jobs. I would assume he's going to take some other job. And that's a real shame, considering that Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell were 2 top 20 running backs this year.
First off, Arthur Smith should not get a head coaching job. Sorry.
Don't disagree.
Sorry, not sorry. But yeah, the Steelers are going to look a lot different. I would guess Aaron Rodgers is not coming back because Mike Tomlin is not coming back. And so the Steelers this offense has a chance to be one of the biggest fantasy wastelands in the NFL next season. Think about it. Who's throwing the football to DK Metcalf? And DK Metcalf was not great this past season. He had his highs, he had his lows. Obviously, he ended the season on a major low. The tight end position, listen, I mean, they all sort of canceled each other out. And then when you look at the wide receivers behind DK Metcalf, well, there's none. There's not really anyone. And Ken Gainwell's a free agent. So Ken Gainwell, I think, to me, the first name that I thought of is Raheem Mostert. Remember when Mostert had 21 touchdowns like out of nowhere, and he was one of the best running backs in fantasy football, and the following year he fell off a cliff? That's what's going to happen to Kenneth Gainwell. Unless he ends up on a team that's going to utilize him in the same sort of way as the Steelers did this past season, which is possible. But Ken Gainwell is very likely to not be a fantasy asset next season. And what's crazy about this whole Steelers situation is that we haven't even spoken Kaleb Johnson's name yet. And Kaleb Johnson was number one in Dynasty, probably picked ahead of both Jaylen Warren and Ken Gainwell. And he finished as one of the worst draft picks maybe ever. I'm talking about in fantasy. Okay. He went in a redraft in the NFFC, which is a high stakes format. He went like 1.5 spots behind Jaylen Warren. And Ken Gainwell was at 281.8. And Ken Gainwell wasn't even the third Steelers running back off the board. He was the fourth one. Cordero Patterson was the third, if you can believe that. Gainwell finished as the RB20. Kaleb Johnson finished as the RB107. Britton Brown had more fantasy points than him. So you have to factor him in, because if Gainwell's gone, does Johnson get an opportunity? Right now, I don't know if there's any Steelers that I actually want on my fantasy team right now, dynasty or otherwise.
So let's start with Gainwell, because he was actually named the team's MVP, which maybe shows you where Pittsburgh was at as an offense. But he's said that he's wanted to be back. I take all of that with a grain of salt now that Mike Tomlin is gone, and now that Aaron Rodgers is gone, because Aaron Rodgers did not want to get hit. So what does that mean? He's getting rid of the ball quickly. He's throwing the ball underneath to these running backs over and over again, whether it's Mason Rudolph, who's way more willing to stand in the pocket and throw the ball down the field, or insert veteran quarterback. Maybe they get Kyler Murray. Maybe they get Mac Jones in a trade. I don't know. But there's just not going to be a quarterback out there that's going to want to throw to the running backs as much as Aaron Rodgers did, which makes me think Gainwell, who's a free agent, moves on. Jaylen Warren goes back to being the featured guy. But I do think this opens up an opportunity for Kaleb Johnson, who was in Mike Tomlin's doghouse all year long because he fumbled a kickoff in week 2 against Seattle. I've got to believe the next coaching staff is going to want to give him a chance, because the front office drafted him high. So my question for you is, right now in Dynasty Leagues, Kaleb Johnson, RB33, Jaylen Warren, RB26. Who would you rather have?
I mean, I'd rather have Jaylen Warren.
By a lot or a little?
No, I think it's a lot,
Okay.
because Kaleb Johnson failed so miserably as a rookie that a player who really had never even made an impact, either in real or fantasy football, in Kenneth Gainwell, usurped him and really played extremely well. And Kaleb Johnson, coming into the season, we all thought he could be the next Najee Harris type, and it would be somewhat of a committee, and that just didn't happen. And when a player, it's the same thing as with Jaden Blue. Like, when you draft a guy at a position where you don't really have like a number one type of asset, and the Cowboys didn't going into training camp. Remember, we didn't know if it was going to be Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders or Jaden Blue. And a player doesn't play for the majority of the season, something's up, right? We're not privy to what happens in meetings and what happens in practices. Although a Locked On Cowboys had a report that he was a bit lazy, and maybe that ended up being the truth because he didn't play that much. And the Steelers, it's not like this team had all these playmakers, dude. I mean, outside of, and you want to think about the Steelers too, you think of like this great franchise that's made all these great moves. They have been bad on the offensive side, at least, since Ben Roethlisberger decided to retire. They've been bad. Kenny Pickett was a bust. They brought in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Neither one of those guys worked out. They brought in Aaron Rodgers, and maybe it was just to put butts in seats. I don't know, because it may have been his last year and he's going to the Hall of Fame. That obviously
they brought in Mitch Trubisky, and they benched him after 3 games. So they've been doing this for a while.
DK Metcalf, trading for him and not bringing in another wide receiver. getting rid of George Pickens. Like, all of their moves have not worked on the offensive side of the football so far. So you got to wonder, can we have any faith in any Steelers in fantasy, at least, this upcoming season in 2026? And I think the answer right now is no.
No, and we should just mention really quickly, Pat Fryermuth, in his postseason press availability, said that he was really disappointed with his role in the offense, and that was him being nice.
He was very good in 2024.
Yeah. Jonnu Smith was a Pro Bowler in 2024 with Miami, gets traded to Pittsburgh. I think I saw a stat that his last 6 targets went for a combined -2 yards.
Was that not the easiest thing to predict in the world? Yeah, he was going to fall flat in Pittsburgh after having that huge season in Miami. The Steelers, that offense just, it almost like compares to me to the New York Yankees, who the roster construction was just really lousy last season. You go into the season with 3 left-handed catchers, makes no sense, and other places too. The Steelers and what they did really didn't make sense. They didn't have a number 2 wide receiver. The quarterback situation. I mean, listen, Aaron Rodgers was not great in New York, but he was worse in Pittsburgh than he was in New York this past season in 2024. A lot of bad decisions by the Steelers.
All right, let's talk about some breakout receivers, including Chris Olave. What should we make of his magical 2025 season? We'll get to that next.
New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with your customers. And I really love how simple Quo makes everything. Your whole team can get a call and a text from one shared business number, so nothing ever gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replying faster and a lot more personal. It works right from your phone or your computer, and you can even keep your existing phone number. And Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps, so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise, Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNFL. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNFL. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers.
This episode is brought to you by Home Chef. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner is a big one. Between busy work days, cold winter nights, listen, I know about cold winter nights, and packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan just makes a huge difference. And that's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why. Meals come ready to fit your schedule, 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, or quick lunches. They have over 30 weekly options, including family-sized meals and different dietary choices. And the recipes are simple, but they feel elevated. So for a limited time, Home Chef is offering our listeners 50% off your first box, plus free shipping and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/LockedOn. That's homechef.com/LockedOn for 50% off your first box with free shipping and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Fabs, I want to talk about Chris Olave because this was somebody who the Dynasty community was down on going into the season, and rightfully so. He has a pretty scary injury concussion list from the last couple of years. I think he's had 4 in 3 seasons. There was some talk that maybe he would retire. Instead, he goes out and has the best year of his career. What do we make of Olave?
Listen, it was never about the skill. It was always about the worry that he could potentially have another concussion that might end his season and career.
Mm-hmm.
And, he even came out and said, I was, concerned about, what my career path is going to be here in pro football after having those multiple concussions. But you've got to love the connection that he made with Tyler Shough. You've got to love the development of Shough down the stretch. He looked like an NFL quarterback, right? Listen, I don't know how many games he's going to win, but obviously
they were way more competitive than we thought they would be.
They were very actually competitive down the stretch. And you look at some of the quarterbacks that Kellen Moore has worked with, he's had success. And so Shough is going to be atop my sleeper list at the quarterback position for next season. There's no question about that. This has nothing to do with Olave's skills. Like I said, it's all about the concerns about the injuries and the concussions, more to the point. And if he can avoid those, this is a guy who now you've got to put him in that wide receiver 1 category, Marcus. He's a young player who is ridiculously talented. And coming into the season, we all loved him. Coming into his NFL career, we all loved him coming out of Ohio State. And it was only because of the concussions where we all backed off. We all got a little bit scared. And, and you're scared for the young man too, because you don't want that kind of thing to happen to him. But it was great to see him come out and play 16 games and really thrive from a statistical perspective. So if you're not someone who likes to take risks and you still think Olave is a risk, he'll be a player that you probably avoid. If I'm in a dynasty startup, considering his level of production last year and his age, I'm going in.
I mean, I love Olave. I love watching him. I love his talent. The only thing I will say is that sometimes the season end production doesn't match the overall fantasy value. And I'll give you an example. He finished the season against the Titans and Jets, 2 of the worst teams in the league, 2 of the worst defenses in all of football. In those games, 18 receptions for like 170 yards and 3 touchdowns. And while those spike weeks are what you want, the rest of the season was not like that. I mean, he only had one other game where he had 100 receiving yards. And for most of the season, it was a lot of like 3 for 57, 5 for 59, 7 for 59, 10 for 57. I'm not saying it's not valuable, but when you look at the end of the season totals, 100 catches, 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns, it didn't always feel that way. And I wonder what we should do with him in our dynasty values, our dynasty leagues, because 1,100 yards is really nice, Fabs. It really is. But that's not wide receiver 1 numbers. Like, that's not the kind of production.
His receptions in PPR were, though.
Correct. Yes, that's the only thing. I still value him as like a mid-level wide receiver 2, and partially because of the concussion history. I think you have to factor that in, but it was nice to see him stabilize his value a little bit.
No, I mean, there's no doubt about that. And yeah, there were games early on in the season, where the numbers weren't great. In fact, I, continue to put him in stardom and sit him as a start because he wasn't obvious. But as we got towards the end of the season, he became more obvious. And like, you're 100% right. There are players, and we've seen this before. Look at Jonnu Smith last year. I mean, a guy goes on a ridiculous heater in a 3-4 game stretch, and that bulks up his totals. But I think the thing that's different with Olave is that he's the only game in town. So he's going to get a ton of targets. He's still young, and he's in an offense run by Kellen Moore, and Kellen Moore has had success in this league as an offensive coordinator and a head coach, obviously, from a statistical perspective. And that's why I think he's maybe a little bit different. The Saints have to do something at the wide receiver position in the offseason. I think they need to add more pieces, down the stretch. I mean, they were the last game of the year, they were starting with Kevin Austin. So, they need to add some weapons, but I'm not saying that Chris Olave is going to be an elite wide receiver. No, but I think I think he is at the back end of the wide receiver 1, top of the wide receiver 2 conversation. So,
and I would push him down a little bit further. And the only reason is we're 4 years into his career right now. The most receiving yards he's ever had was 1,100. And it's not very often that you get a guy that suddenly goes from 1,100 to like 1,400. And that's kind of what
but
you
need. if I'm getting 90 plus catches and 1,100 yards, and then you factor in, 6 to 8 touchdowns, that's pretty good.
It is, of course it is. I think I would just rather gamble on some of the receivers that are like.
Would you rather have him or Jameson Williams?
Jameson.
Yeah, see, I'd rather have Olave.
Okay. And to me, like the guys ahead of him, like McMillan, Ibuka, George Pickens, Lad McConkey, Garrett Wilson. I just think
why would you rather have Lad McConkey over Chris Olave?
Well, can we do this really quickly? Because
Yeah.
Greg Roman isn't the offensive coordinator anymore with the Chargers. So they're not going to be so run heavy. They're actually going to hire an offensive coordinator that knows how to protect Justin Herbert. This is like the best thing that's ever happened for Justin Herbert.
Don't you think that's a scapegoat kind of thing, though? I mean, Greg Roman is not the reason why their offensive lineman, got hurt and that collapsed the offense, right?
But correct. He's not the reason why the offensive lineman got hurt, but he's not good at covering these guys up. And let me give you an example. Mike McCarthy, a coach that we don't love, but we think is okay. He had one season with Dak where they lost 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen. And Dak Prescott threw for almost 5,000 yards and 35 touchdowns. Good offensive coordinators and offensive minds know how to, mitigate that loss. And I will say, like, go look at the Ravens' history with pass catchers when they had Greg Roman, right? Nothing. We didn't want any part